Where do polar bears live?
Polar bears live in the circumpolar region. So that means around a pole. And in this case, polar bears only live around the North Pole. So any country that's close to the North Pole is where polar bears live. So that can be Canada, Russia, Sweden, Norway, Greenland, any country that's on the northern part of the world.
How big does a polar bear grow?
They're very big. We call them the largest land carnivore in North America.
Do they have to have like about 10 dads?
Well, to answer your question, the dad polar bears, they can weigh 1,000 pounds or even a little bit more than that. So that's about 500 kilograms. The mums are actually a lot smaller than the dads, and they weigh probably around 600 pounds or about 300 kilograms. A lot smaller.
What do polar bears eat?
Well, in some ways you could say polar bears will eat anything they can get their paws on. But their favorite food, their very favorite food, that's right, are ringed seals. And if they had their choice, that's all they would eat. But sometimes they eat other stuff too, like walruses or narwhals, that's right, or whales. They might eat plants if they're really desperate, but usually not.
Do polar bears hibernate?
Do they hibernate? That's a really good question. Everybody thinks that all bears hibernate. They don't.
Well, the mothers do dig a hole and watch over the babies.
Well, you know what? They do that. They dig what's called a maternity den, and they go into the maternity den and they give birth. But they're not sleeping while they're in there. They're just kind of dozing. So it's not at all the same thing. Male polar bears, the dads, they don't hibernate at all. They might slow down, their systems slow down, their metabolism, but they don't hibernate. Hibernate is a really specific scientific term, and polar bears, they don't do that.
How do polar bears swim in cold water?
How do they what?
Swim in the cold water.
How do they swim in the cold water? Polar bears are amazing swimmers. They can swim about 200 kilometers, so they could swim from Orleans all the way to Montreal without stopping, which is much farther than I can swim. I don't know about you. When they swim, there's a couple of things. One, they're very, very fat, so they float nicely. That's a bonus. Also, their hair is hollow, so that's just like wearing floaties all over their bodies.
Oh, like, because they have waterproof fur?
They have waterproof fur, you're right. And on their front paws, they have webbed feet. So it's just like wearing flippers on their front paws. That helps them to swim very well. They don't kick with their back legs like we do. They just sort of let them float behind themselves.
How many babies does a polar bear have?
How many babies do they have? Well, once upon a time, maybe 25 to 30 years ago, some mothers would have as many as 4 cubs. Nowadays, it's uncommon, very uncommon for them to have as many as 4. Usually it's 2 or 1 nowadays.
If they have 4, will they leave the weakest one and feed it?
Maybe, probably not. In the olden days, the mother had enough milk to be able to help all of those cubs survive. Nowadays, that's more unusual. They're not as healthy now as what they used to be.
Why does the polar bear not like his kid, the baby polar bear?
I wouldn't say that the dad polar bears don't like the baby polar bears, because in the animal world, it's pretty different from the human world. We don't think they really have emotions like us. The father polar bears are kind of dangerous to the baby polar bears, and they might even actually eat their cubs if they get the chance, because polar bears, as I said before, in some ways will kind of eat anything they can get their paws on. The mother polar bears, she chases the father away if she needs to, so that she can protect her babies. But usually the males, they just don't stick around. And it's not because they don't love them, it just doesn't work like that in the animal world.
What's a polar bear's usual enemy?
Polar bears don't have any enemies except people. That's right. They're natural enemies. There are no natural enemies. They're the biggest land carnivore around. But humans do hunt them for different reasons. Sometimes because the polar bear comes into their city, like Churchill, and that's very dangerous for people.
I want because so they can make fur coats out of their fur.
Sometimes, some people like the Inuit, they can really benefit from having that kind of fur because it's very, very warm, or they can sell it for a lot of money and they make enough money to keep the community going, to keep the community fed, to pay for things for school, basketballs and tennis rackets and stuff like that. So they use the money in the community. It's very, very valuable.
What's affected to the polar bears global warming?
Global warming. Global warming is a pretty tough thing for some polar bears. Right now, there are places in the world where the ice that the polar bears live on, especially ice where the polar bears hunt. Do you remember what they hunt? What's their favorite food? Ring seals, that's right. So if there's no ice for the ring seals to have their pups on, their babies, then polar bears can't really hunt the seals because even though they can swim a really long way, seals are much better swimmers because they can turn and dive and swim quickly, and polar bears can't do that. So what happens is the polar bears have nothing to eat.
And they're drowning?
They can drown. There are some examples of that because they can't swim all the way from the ice to the shore. Now this is true in some places, but not everywhere. So in Churchill, for example, that's the city in Manitoba that you were talking about, that's true, that the ice is melting much sooner and freezing much later, and that's a big problem for the polar bears. For polar bears who live much farther north, on the northern part of Greenland, or in some of the islands in Canada, right now, it's not a problem for them because the ice is not melting. Although, scientists think that within 50 years, so when you're 56 years old, there's probably not going to be any ice at all in the north, and that will be a big problem for the polar bears.
Oh. How did you learn so much about polar bears?
Well, I read a lot of books, and I did a lot of research on the internet. I work with scientists who are very, very smart about polar bears, and they help me to learn too. And sometimes by doing interviews, just like you're doing, with people who really know a lot about polar bears.